Oliver Twist. From the book 10 Boys from Dickens by Kate Dickinson Sweetser, published in 1901. Part 1. Oliver Twist was the child of an unknown woman who died in the workhouse of an English village almost as soon as her babe drew his first breath. The mother's name unknown, the workhouse officials called the child Oliver Twist, under which title he grew up. For 9 years he was farmed out at a branch poorhouse where, with 20 or 30 other children, he bore all the miseries consequent on neglect, abuse, and starvation. He was then removed to the workhouse proper to be taught a useful trade. His 9th birthday found him a pale, thin child, diminutive in stature, and decidedly small in circumference, but possessed of a good, sturdy spirit, which was not broken by the policy of the officials, who tried to get as much work out of the paupers as possible, and to keep them on as scant a supply of food as would sustain life. The boys were fed in a large stone hall, with a copper at one end, out of which the gruel was ladled at mealtimes. Of this festive composition, each boy had 1 porringer, and no more, except on occasions of great public rejoicing, when he had 2 ounces and a quarter of bread besides. The bowls never wanted washing. The boys polished them with their spoons till they shone again, and when they had performed this operation, they would sit staring at the copper as if they could have devoured the very bricks of which it was composed, sucking their fingers with a view of catching up any stray splashes of gruel that might have been cast thereon. Boys have generally excellent appetites. Oliver Twist and his companions suffered the tortures of slow starvation for 3 months. At last they got so voracious and wild that one boy hinted darkly that unless he had another basin of gruel a day, he was afraid he might, some night, happen to eat the boy who slept next to him. He had a wild, hungry eye, and they implicitly believed him. Council was held. Lots were cast, who should walk up to the master and ask for more, and it fell to Oliver Twist. The evening arrived. The boys took their places. The gruel was served out, and a long grace was said. The gruel disappeared. The boys whispered to each other and winked at Oliver, while his next neighbors nudged him. Child as he was desperate with hunger and reckless with misery. He rose and, advancing to the master, basin and spoon in hand, said, somewhat alarmed at his own temerity, "Please, sir, I want some more." The master was a fat, healthy man, but he turned very pale. He gazed in stupefied astonishment on the small rebel for some seconds, and then clung for support to the copper. The assistants were paralyzed with wonder, the boys with fear.
"What?"
said the master at length in a faint voice. "Please, sir," replied Oliver, I want some more." The master aimed a blow at Oliver's head with the ladle, pinioned him in his arms, and shrieked for the beadle, and when that gentleman appeared, an animated discussion took place. Oliver was ordered into instant confinement, and a bill was next morning pasted at the outside of the gate, offering a reward of £5 to anybody who would take Oliver Twist off the hands of the parish. In other words, £5 and Oliver Twist were offered to any man or woman who wanted an apprentice to any trade, business, or calling. Mr. Sowerberry, the parish undertaker, finally applied for the prize and carried Oliver away with him, which, for the poor boy, was a matter of falling from the frying pan into the fire. And in his short career as undertaker's assistant, he even sighed for the workhouse, miserable as his life there had been. At the undertaker's, Oliver's bed was in the shop. The atmosphere seemed tainted with the smell of coffins. The recess behind the counter in which his mattress was thrust looked like a grave. His food was broken bits left from the meals of others, and his constant companion was an older boy, Noah Claypole, who, although a charity boy himself, was not a workhouse orphan, and therefore considered himself in a position above Oliver. He made Oliver's days hideous with his abuse, which the younger boy bore as quietly as he could, until the day that Noah made a sneering remark about Oliver's dead mother. That was too much. Crimson with fury, Oliver started up, seized Noah by the throat, shook him till his teeth chattered, and then, with one heavy blow, felled him to the ground. This brought about a violent scene, for Noah accused Oliver of attempting to murder him, and Mrs. Sowerberry, the maid, and the beadle, who had been hastily summoned, agreed that Oliver was a hardened wretch, only fit for confinement, and he was accordingly placed in the cellar till the undertaker came in, when he was dragged out again to have the story retold. To do Mr. Sowerberry justice, he would have been kindly disposed towards Oliver, but for the prejudice of his wife against the boy. However, to satisfy her, he gave Oliver a sound beating and shut him up in the black kitchen until night, when, amidst the jeers and pointings of Noah and Mrs. Sowerberry, he was ordered upstairs to his dismal bed. It was then, alone, in the silence of the gloomy workshop, that Oliver gave way to his feelings and wept bitterly, resolved no longer to bear such treatment. Softly he undid the fastenings of the door and looked abroad. It was a cold night. The stars seemed to the boy's eyes farther from the earth than he had ever seen them before. There was no wind, and the sombre shadows looked death-like from being so still. He softly reclosed the door, and having availed himself of the expiring light of the candle to tie up in a handkerchief the few articles of wearing apparel he had, sat himself down to wait for morning. With the first ray of light, Oliver rose and again unbarred the door. One timid look around, 1 minute's pause of hesitation, and then he closed it behind him. He looked to the right and to the left, uncertain which way to fly. He remembered to have seen the wagons as they went on, toiling up the hill, so he took the same route, and arriving at a footpath, which he knew led into the road, struck into it, and walked quickly on. For 7 days long, he tramped in the direction of London, tasting nothing but such scraps of meals as he could beg from the occasional cottages by the roadside. On the 7th morning, he limped slowly into the little town of Barnet, and as he was resting for a few moments on the steps of a public-house, a boy crossed over, and walking close to him said, "Hello, McCovey, what's the row?" The boy who addressed this inquiry to the young wayfarer was about his own age, but one of the strangest-looking boys that Oliver had ever seen. He was snub-nosed, flat-browed, common-faced, a young boy enough, and as dirty a juvenile as one would wish to see, but he had about him all the airs and manners of a man. He was short, with bow legs, and little, sharp, ugly eyes peered at Oliver. His hat was stuck on the top of his head, and he wore a man's coat that reached nearly to his heels.
"Hello? What's the row?"
said the strange young gentleman to Oliver again. "I'm very hungry and tired," replied Oliver, the tears standing in his eyes as he spoke. "I've walked a long way. I've been walking these 7 days."
"Going to London?"
inquired the strange boy. "Yes."
"Got any lodgings?"
"No."
"Money?"
"No." The strange boy whistled and put his arms into his pockets. "Do you live in London?" inquired Oliver.
"Yes, I do when I'm at home,"
replied the boy.
"I suppose you want some place to sleep in tonight, don't you?"
Upon Oliver answering in the affirmative, the strange boy, whose name was Jack Dawkins, said,
"I've got to be in London tonight, and I know a respectable old gentleman who lives there what'll give you lodgings for nothing and never ask for the change. That is, if any gentleman he knows introduces you."
This offer of shelter was too tempting to be resisted, and Oliver trudged off with his new friend. Into the city they passed, and through the worst and darkest streets, the sight of which filled Oliver with alarm. At length they reached the door of a house, which Jack entered, drawing Oliver after him into its dark passageway, and closing the door after them. Oliver, groping his way round with one hand and having the other firmly grasped by his companion, ascended with much difficulty the dark and broken stairs, which his conductor mounted with an expedition that showed he was well acquainted with them. He threw open the door of a back room and drew Oliver in after him into the deep darkness. End of part 1.